GROUNOW presents Grow Your Mind, a Tech Talk series where experts and leaders discuss technical, behavioral, and business topics and take questions from software and hardware engineers and management. In today's session, Andy Betts joins us to shine some light on how engineers can help save the world, one engagement at a time. You might have a burning desire what to do, but not sure how to achieve it. Andy will share some simple techniques to put into practice that will help you at work, life, or in your quest to make the world a better place. I'm your host, Suraj Ethirajan, founder of GrowUnow. I help individual contributors and first-time managers in software and hardware tech companies who are stuck or unbalanced in their career break into roles to get the impact, purpose, and income they deserve without working longer hours. I've led global customer experience teams in the past, innovated in industries, leading technologies for silicon, networking, comms, data center, and IoT products. I enjoy reading, hiking, running, and traveling with my family and friends. We have two moderators today. Our first moderator, Pooja Tyagi. She's a technical program manager with background in semiconductors, communication systems, and management of engineering teams. Her goal is to be good at being human in the world of technology. She lives by the mantra, it ain't over until you give up. When you ask her what keeps her sane, you'll find out it's the wilderness, finding order in chaos, and family. She does all of this with a nice cup of coffee. We have our second moderator today, Josh. Josh is a graduate and former student who studied electrical and computer engineering with a primary focus on power systems and a secondary focus on business foundations at the University of Texas at Austin. With departmental honors, he completed his business minor through the McCombs School of Business. And he is a 2018 McCombs Summer Institute alumni with Halliburton Scholarship. He graduated with an engineering degree in December of 2020 from the prestigious Cockrell School of Engineering. And outside of the classroom and work, Josh thoroughly enjoys working with the community and giving back through volunteer opportunities. Raised in Carrollton, Texas, he grew up heavily involved with Boy Scouts of America and earned his Eagle Scout at 15 years old. He's been on numerous hiking, backpacking, scuba, and ski trips and has a passion for attending as many sporting events as possible. Feel free to ask Josh anything about the connection between data analytics and sports, especially the Texas Longhorns, and be happy to entertain any conversation. And then we have our guest speaker today. Thank you. We have the pleasure and honor to hear from Andy Betts, who helps companies worldwide to optimize their field operations as the creator of the ICON 9 system and the founder of ICONDA Solutions. This covers all aspects of technical sales and marketing and applications engineering. Though as we'll see, there's considerable scope for Andy's tools and methods in areas outside of that. Andy has 25 years experience in the tech industry, his first half in design roles and second in the field working directly with customers. He lives in Grenoble, France, surrounded by beautiful mountains and is often seen hiking, biking, and on cross-country skis. Thank you, Andy, for joining us today.
Nice to be here.
All right. Wanted to ask you a few questions, right? To begin with, how can engineers positively impact the world or save the world? It's a very broad, if not loaded question. So can you walk us through how did we come up with this question? Why this question and why now?
Why this question? Because you asked me to come up with a few questions and that seemed like a good one. But particularly because engineers do have a huge impact, right? We have a huge positive impact and a huge negative impact. If you look just at recent events, the pandemic, I mean, without engineers, we wouldn't have viruses, but we wouldn't have vaccines, and we wouldn't have had all that internet technology that helps us keep in touch with each other and helps us keep working. So we really do come up with solutions. On the slightly negative side, you could argue that engineers are probably responsible for all the existential threats that we face at the moment. Things like nuclear war and climate warming and genetic modifications, all of that is engineering. So, you know, there's no doubt we have a huge impact. And if we could kind of change the balance a bit more in the positive direction, you know, the balance will be fantastically more positive. And why now? Or why now is because, you know, it seems critical, right? Because the world needs solutions. Surely the engineering community, you know, should be able to help more. Yeah.
They help more. But I think the perspective is engineers are very technical, meaning we solve technical problems, right? Can you help us understand how can we actually do something about it? Or how can we actually make a change? Because a lot of them are non-technical problems, right?
Yeah, that's right. But the trouble is that we're the only kind of people that are, I think, in a position to anticipate enough to be able to solve some of the problems we face. Okay, I started off talking about the, you know, the big problems the world faces, but it comes down to very small things as well. I mean, we can, for example, I mean, we predicted global warming and all the rest of it, fine. But I predicted that my son one day was going to mess up his computer from the very careless way in which he treated the thing. And sure enough, in spite of my warnings that it's a delicate, you know, electronic instrument, he uses it in the kitchen and spills sticky liquid all over it, and the thing doesn't work anymore. Right? So if our ability to understand technology and predict what's going to happen next could be translated into more effective kind of communication and warnings, I think we'd all be a lot better off. I mean, there are great communicators out there. You know, you can think of terrific engineering videos like Kurzgesagt, and you can think of some people that really can transmit science beautifully through documentaries and so on. But are those big warnings enough, right? Perhaps we should try a bottom-up approach as well, and help the engineering community be better at getting the scientific culture across to everybody. Yeah?
I see. But I think what I'm sensing is, you know, we are good in analyzing things, maybe predicting using our skill set. But then there seems to be how we communicate it, right? I think if we work even with engineers, there are challenges as is. When we work with non-engineers, I think communication, perhaps from what I'm hearing, plays a more vital role in how we do that. Is there a problem in that space? Is communication a problem? And if yes or no, what do we do about either? How do we act?
But I think you put your finger on it, really, because the thing is, in the workspace, we tend to live in a kind of bubble of engineering, scientific people with whom we can communicate. Even in those situations, you know, there is miscommunication. It's possible, but it's nothing like as difficult to communicate with our peers, you know, who share the same engineering culture as us, as it is to communicate with people who really, you know, their education and background is so different. Okay. And typically what you see is an engineer, when asked about something, will explain stuff. You know, an engineer will try and be clear and accurate and honest. And that sounds like exactly the right thing to do, but it's not always the right thing to do.
Yeah, I think that was a big challenge for me, you know, when from my earlier years being an engineer, is I had all this knowledge and I wanted to share, but depending on the situation, what amount to share and how to share, I learned later was important. Can you give a specific example so either I and the audience can actually understand the details and actually put our imagination to use as to how we can apply that in our daily lives?
Yeah, I've got loads of examples. I mean, a professional example is very simple. Is you're trying to explain to the finance guy, you know, why you really need this software because it's going to make you more productive. And if you explain it in terms of, well, you know, I need this software because the runtimes are so much better, or the GUI is so much more effective, you know, the guy doesn't care. if I take an example I like a lot because I use it a lot, when I give training, I get people to try and explain to their Aunt Edna why she should use a smartphone. And if you just give people that task and let them they'll explain why a smartphone can be very effective and it's got these functions and you'll be able to be accessible outside and this kind of stuff. And of course it doesn't work, right? Because that's not the world in which Aunt Edna lives. You've got to try and the first thing is you've got to try and understand the metaphors the other person uses, the world they live in, the vocabulary they're using, the concerns they've got, and hook into that in order to communicate. And that's where I think we've got a lot to work on, because we've got a particular education that gives us a huge amount of scientific knowledge and baggage and ways of doing things that do make it hard to get outside the bubble, to communicate outside the bubble.
I see. I think it's needless to say, when you go to college or when you're at work, you're solving these problems. And when you're actually communicating your answers in all of these scenarios, there are either people like-minded to you that can understand, especially in school, because there's definitely a question and a defined answer for the most part.
Yeah.
When it comes to work, I think a lot of that breaks down and you're trying to work with people with different opinions and ideas, and throw culture in the mix. Since we work in a multicultural environment, now more than ever before, how can we build the skills to understand different cultures? And even within the same place, even if you live in a city, for example, San Francisco, there are a lot of people with different viewpoints, different opinions. How do we bring ourselves to the table to first, from what I'm hearing, understand who you're talking to, and then there's a separate piece on how you actually communicate that? Are they two different pieces, and how do you mind elaborating on that?
You can think of them as different pieces or not, but I mean, the first answer may sound a bit trite, but it really is true. You've got to start with listening. Because otherwise you just don't get any information on where the other person's coming from. New York's a very nice example, actually. I mean, you can easily imagine all of the different points of view you've got in New York. Apparently they did a test recently. Somebody stood on a street corner in New York and took DNA samples for as many people as possible. And in an afternoon, they covered every point of the planet apart from the Kalahari Desert. So you've just got everybody in New York, and you can imagine, the range of values and beliefs. You've just got to start with listening and taking your time, because until you've keyed into the language the other person is likely to be able to receive, there just isn't any point in continuing. And as you say, at school, we're exposed to the same type of problems and the same type of demands from teachers for clarity, and conciseness and so on. But that's only one way of communicating, and you kind of got to realize that may or may not be appropriate, and try and fix to another, switch to another register when you have to. So I think listening has got to be absolutely the first thing. And because it's not, none of this is terribly easy, you've got to give yourself enough time as well. So not just jumping in and saying what comes to mind immediately, instinctively, is another part of it. Because if we jump in and use instinct, we'll go straight into our comfort zone and communicate how we've always communicated. So it's real simple stuff to start with. And then, of course, there are things to build on top of it, but you've got to start with those simple basics.
Yeah, I think it's, a lot of thoughts come to my mind, precisely what you said. I'm tempted to respond or share, hey, even I know this. And we all do this. We seek to, we're here to respond, not here to understand. And I'm still learning and working on how to get better as a listener, as an active listener. There are different ways to do it. There's the obvious way, but how do you actually listen? Are there any tips you can share for us to listen? I like what you said, what to do, but how do we do it?
Yeah, okay. So there's the thing about listening is that it's extraordinarily difficult, because when you listen, you're getting a lot of stimulus. And so with the best will in the world, you cannot avoid distractions. So your mind's distracted and off it goes somewhere else, and you're not listening anymore because we're really single-threaded, you know. So there's a bit of engineering talk for you. But so that's a bit of a problem. And so the techniques I use for listening are essentially to try and get rid of the distractions. So very often I'll just write something down or squiggle something so that I can get back to listening. Because until until I've captured the thought, I'm going to be struggling to hold on to it, and then I'm not listening anymore.
And when do you do this? Do you do this when you are in a lecture, which is the obvious thing, people take notes? Do you do this when you talk to clients, when you talk to customers, when you talk to peers? When do you recommend we write? Yeah.
It depends whether you can write or not, because it does depend on the circumstances. I do it all the time with customers. I certainly do it with customers because of the need to capture what they say and to keep listening. And it's also linked to that point I was saying about just taking your time, pausing, because if you just say to a customer or anybody, hold on a second, I just need to write that down, I need to write something down, rather than that being a problem for people, it tends to reassure them that you are listening or that you are paying attention. Because otherwise you wouldn't have said, hold on a second, I just need to do this, right? You kind of communicate that you're more involved in the conversation if you do that sort of thing than if you just nod like a nodding donkey. It is a sign that you're actually paying attention. If you stop somebody and say, hold on a second, I've got to write something down.
Okay. Thank you. I think it's stirring up more thoughts in my head, and I have another question if you don't mind. A lot of the people that I talk to are very passionate about helping. And the question always arises back to the previous point. Engineers are technical, and we're expected to solve technical problems. But then a lot of what the world needs is beyond technical. And irrespective of whether you're an engineer or not, you are trying to solve world hunger. You're trying to solve, get education to the masses, something as important as that. But you can't just start at the end. We got to start with baby steps. Any advice on where people should start? Where can they start? And with some examples, where can they start? Being engineers or not even being engineers, where can we start?
Where can you start? Well, I guess the very first thing is the oxygen mask analogy. You've got to start by looking after yourself. You're not going to do any of this stuff unless you come from a strong place. You're feeling okay. One of the things we've got to avoid is to take some care of is not getting too, isolated behind all these gadgets and things that we've invented for ourselves. And then, as I say, I think the thing I'd advocate is, build on this innate and kind of inherited set of values we've got around accuracy and being honest in communication, but kind of bolt onto that the idea that your communication also needs to be benevolent, needs to take into account the other person, so that automatically you've got the listening side and the pause and the thinking side to it, and just start with any kind of situation where you're outside of your bubble. Just try and be aware that you're no longer communicating with somebody that is completely in your engineering culture, and whether it be your boss or the HR person or your Aunt Edna or your 17-year-old, make the effort to listen to them and see if you can get across exactly whatever you were trying to explain before, but in a way that they can hear and they can understand.
I see.
And that makes it a constant daily effort, right?
So I think what you're saying is for people to start anywhere, start somewhere. But what's more important than starting somewhere is really focus on how we communicate and how do we educate and listen more and understand these concepts. So before trying to solve world hunger or something big, start somewhere where we can actually understand what is the need of the hour and where we can actually help. Is that how you'd advise the audience?
That's how I see it, because if you look at the big problems in the world, you see exactly the same mistakes being made in communication as in the small things. There's a very important principle of communication that was developed in Palo Alto in the 50s, which is that the meaning of a message is what is received. We tend to think of the message as being what we transmit. But in psychology, the big principle is the meaning of the message is whatever somebody receives. And if you internalize that, you start to really pay attention to the other person when you're talking to them to see what they understood. That is what's going to make the difference. So you've got the accuracy of what you transmit, but then you've got the listening to get that feedback.
That's very wonderfully put, Andy. And on that, there's a question I think that would be a good segue right now, or may also complement what we're talking about is communication. So there's a question that says how to listen as an engineer. What is it that we pick differently or receive differently in the data and the conversation as an engineer, which feeds into the solution we develop?
How to listen as an engineer. I'm not sure I completely understand that question. You mean how do we analyze what we're receiving?
Yes.
Would it be different from what somebody else would? But I guess if you listen as an engineer, you take advantage of all the references that an engineer has. So, for example, things that just come to mind, right, is when you read the newspaper or listen to people talking, and there are generalizations and statistics in all of that. When you listen as an engineer, you tend to try and get behind the generalities and understand factually what's happening. And I think we shouldn't lose that, right? One of the big things in science and engineering is to be based on the facts, and to take measurements and do experiments. So I think when you listen as an engineer, you take advantage of all that training that helps you to look for things that have been measured and things that are real, and to be less prone to the marketing, the fluff, and to try and see through things to what's basically underneath. So, and I guess if I try and, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, I think that triggered more deeper questions. As an engineer, to your point, we're analytical. We look at facts and figures, but not all humans operate that way. So as an engineer, being in our echo chamber, we think and operate. And do you think there's a danger in actually always operating with facts and figures? Because someone might have an emotion that's actually hiding a deeper emotion, and the question is really presented in a different way. And I've seen this with people who are in engineering roles, but are really not passionate about being an engineer. They might be an artist at heart, or they might have another vocation. So as an engineer, looking beyond the question at hand at face value, looking at other dependencies by the person presenting the question. Maybe they're asking the question because it came to them by a different force, an external force that's imposing it. How do we break out of our shell and actually ask that same question, or understand the question? Or when we say active listening, Are we listening beyond the words that's being spoken? And I think that is a critical skill that engineers should develop, which is not necessarily natural to us. So do you mind elaborating on that piece? Yeah.
Yeah, well, you know what I'd suggest really with that is to treat feelings as facts, which they are. Right?
Okay.
So if somebody has a feeling, it's a fact they feel that way. The only thing that's difficult about it is finding out about it, because it's invisible. Right? But the feeling exists. Okay? And so if your attitude is that when you're looking at a situation that there are people involved and therefore feelings involved, and these things are real. Okay, the things that are factual are not just the nuts and bolts and the things you can see, but they are, what's happening inside somebody is a reality. Then you can go looking for that, which is perhaps not so easy. And that's the bit that we're often missing, because I think culturally we're inclined to think of nuts and bolts and electrons and lines of code as being the only realities on the planet. In actual fact, people are real and their feelings are real. And so as engineers, we've got to go find those things. There's it reminds me of some reading I was doing recently about Jung. Jung was Freud's disciple. And Jung had a very scientific background, but he explored all sorts of really weird things, like, dreams and feelings, all sorts of very fluffy stuff. And he did lots of drawing, and when you look at his drawings, they're like medieval, very, very strange things. Not at all scientific, you wouldn't think. But in actual fact, he was much, much more scientific than Freud, his teacher, because Freud was incredibly dogmatic about certain things. For example, he only associated the subconscious with sex and nothing else, right? And Freud would not look at things he couldn't understand. That he just felt were flaky and weren't scientific. And this, I think, is one of the problems in science, is we tend to go for the easy stuff. So we go for the things we really can see and measure and weigh and everything else. But that's not scientific. So scientifically, we should also look hard at the things that are not so easy to quantify. And so, as you say, some people are coming to things from a different angle. They're not so factual in the most classic sense, but yeah, we should look beyond the simple facts and also the more complicated ones, like how are people really feeling, and how can we find out about that? Because that's facts too, really.
Just so that it's digestible for people on the call and even for me, can you give 2 things, maybe max 3 things, that I can do today to apply what you just said? What can I do today? Today, the rest of the day, at least here in the West Coast of the United States, what can I do during the rest of the day to apply exactly what you just said? Because I think the way I understood it, you actually put a different spin, and it might not be, it was natural for me, but how do I start doing that? What can I do today to think like what you just said?
Right. Well, I'm glad to say you do quite a lot of it, because we've been working together for a little while, and you're very sensitive to not just, the need to stick to an agenda, but whether it's the right thing to stick to the agenda, whether we chuck away the plan or that kind of thing. So I'll throw it back at you, Suraj. So what have you got to do today that needs a little bit of polishing and a little bit more skill? Give me an example.
Simple things, whether it be even with my kid, where we're going to go through school work. And it was even preparing for this was a very big deal. So now I need to redirect my time and energy to pick up the pieces that are elsewhere. But I think along the way, how you communicate status quo, how do you communicate expectations? It needs to be nurtured. And I think that's where I tried to see how can I do things better. every single day.
That's a really nice example, and I think honestly, and that's where I've fallen down a lot in the past. I mean, with your kids, they come to they're anything but scientific, right? And so when you go and look after your kids and do some homework with them, you really need to take 5 minutes to, first of all, take a pause and calm down and give yourself the time to switch. One of the things I push very hard to training people about going into meetings is to take the time to visualize the people they're going to talk to, because it just helps you switch from whatever you were doing, coding or something, to focusing on the person. With your kid, that's really important as well. Imagine that you're a 7-year-old, where do you come, how do you approach the meeting with dad or whatever? You're just trying to get on somebody's wavelength by visualization and imagining, because then that'll help you to listen to them better. It's that kind of thing. It's the connection with other people that you are looking for. It's strengthening the relationship, building the trust, and once you've got that channel, then anything's possible. And it's true with with children, it's true with your boss, and it's true with just about anybody you're going to meet.
Yeah, I think that's so very key. And further examples from the work where you work with cross-functional organizations, and there are challenges in priorities. They have a priority A, we have a priority B, and that is a very common place in the workplace, as it is with life, whether it be your day job versus what you want to do good to the world. But I think it need not always be a conflict. It need not always be two different camps. And I think that's where I'm starting to understand that working with people, both parties can win. There is daylight for priority A, and there is daylight for priority B. And I think to your point, when you communicate and understand the other person's perspective, a lot of the times there is a huge overlap in common denominator in what people want. And if you pivot off of that, then you get your victories very quicker. And in fact, what appears as priority A and priority B, it's actually a new form priority C that has a lot of overlap between priority A and B. And it happens with even giving the other person a chance to even talk, but it starts with step 0, like you mentioned. Can we listen? Ask the question to truly listen and to learn, not just to make our point valid across, because in the process, we might even learn that we were wrong to begin with. And I think that's been very helpful.
It's beautifully put. I think there's that's very true, because if you listen, very often you can find that, well, the job's done already. In actual fact, you are talking about the same thing. You do want to go in the same direction. It's just you're saying it in different ways, and you don't understand each other. And that you can just save yourself an awful lot of time, actually, by doing that, because as you say, especially in a company where it's very likely that you need to go in the same direction. That can be very true. And you trigger another point that I think is important, and it's quite a good example of the way not to do stuff. I did a session with somebody a couple of weeks ago, and we did a role play, and the engineer was assigned to convince an HR person of something or other, right? And this guy did an excellent job of explaining why such and such a thing could happen, right? You can imagine a bulldozer. That was essentially what his argument was. It was so logical it wasn't true. This bulldozer came through, and absolutely all the arguments went, and the HR person absolutely had to give in. And so after it, so what was the conclusion? Well, the conclusion was the engineer got their way, right? And so you ask the engineer, well, how did that go? Well, brilliant. Explain that. Job done. You ask the HR person, oh, they've been crushed. And so, you've got a short-term victory, but they've been absolutely crushed by the logic of this argument.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's something that we do unintentionally, or I like to have positive intent, or assume positive intent, that people do something like that. They get their point across so strongly, they win, but in actually they don't win because you've lost trust, you lost the connection with the other person. And I've
So what
seen
you
it.
described before was win-win, and the
Yeah.
bulldozer win-lose. So you win, but that's no good because you're working with people.
Yeah. Yeah, let's take a different angle, because I'm seeing another question up here, and maybe Pooja, you can bring to our attention the essence of this question, but I'm going to read it out as is. Engineers are diverse too. They are in every quarter of the HBDI chart. I need help understanding what is HBDI. Some are focused on why, some on what, and some on how, and some on who. Andy, do you want to take that question directly, or Pooja, do you want to add some more color to that?
Yeah, I need some more color because it's true, but the question isn't clear to me.
Oh, yeah. So let me explain what HBDI stands for. It's the Herman Brain Dominance Instrument Assessment. So what it does is the people who take the test, at the end of the test, they're assessed and they are graded in the 4 quadrants. And that 4 quadrants typically assess your key strengths, which can be your focus on a what. So you're very analytical that way. Focused on a why. So you're focused on big pictures, visions, and the bigger solutions. The focused on how are people who are focused, who think process-wise, how to flow this, how to scale this. And the 4th quadrant is the who. Yes, we are doing all the data collection, the processing, and setting the vision, but there is a quadrant who focus on who we are doing it for.
Yep.
So that is the HBDI assessment that categorizes people in those 4 quadrants. And while we were talking about the uniqueness that everybody brings, and the question that Suraj had, that everybody comes from a different background, and how we can be part of the solution in the capabilities that we bring best on the table. That's where the statement was made. So it's not really a question, but something to elaborate on how that diversity within the realm of engineering impacts the solution we build for the future.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting question for the engineering community itself. It's an internal thing. Be aware, there is nevertheless, although it's true we're all over that chart, if you do that chart for a group of 1,000 engineers and a group of 1,000 nurses, for example, you'll get a different result. So we do, there is a certain tendency in engineering or in any profession to be in different places in that chart. Nevertheless, you've got diversity, and you've got cultural diversity, and you've got 2 sexes and all sorts of other stuff. And yeah, that is something to exploit. That's something to exploit very much when you lead teams, for example. It's something I'm sure Suraj does as I do. In coaching, you try to encourage people involved in team leadership to recognize where the diversity is in their team, because it's extremely valuable. Everybody's thinking the same direction. That's no good. And you've got communication problems within teams, or challenges within teams, because of this different way of thinking as well. Somebody starting with a why is a bit different from somebody who looks at things from the what point of view, or the people point of view. It's not a question of engineers are in one world and everybody else is in another one. It's much more complex than that. So it's a good observation, and I think, and the fact that if you did that analysis on different communities, you'd see a characteristic distributions in each community is also an illustration of why we have to take that into account when we're outside of our engineering bubble, because we are in talking to people who are, generally in a different profile. We do tend to, the reason for this is that, engineers tend to be the people that find analysis easy and are attracted to that thing. You end up in that profession. And so naturally it biases the distribution. So there's a lot of what we've got to do in communication is kind of to compensate for our natural biases. And we end up in a community that does the opposite, of course. Yeah. It's a bit like sorry, Pooja, go ahead.
I was just summarizing it, Andy, that just identifying where you lie, what are your biases, and then building a team or a community where those biases are complemented, like not complemented, but
valued. Yeah.
They're filled out with, and you make a whole team who is focused on all those questions: why, what, how, and for who.
Yeah, exactly.
And then finding that balance.
Usually the way we talk about it is not so much they're focused on that, is that that's where they go first. Right. So some people will first ask the question why, and other people will first ask the question who. Generally, we can do all of them. Everybody can do all of them, but you've got a preference, and you tend to go for your comfort zone first. It's quite important to remember that we can all do all of this stuff. I mean, we really can. I've never met anybody that's completely incapable of decent communication. But it's a question of, we prefer to do things a certain way. Are we aware of it? And how can we learn to, get out of our comfort zone when we need to?
I have a very specific question to dive deeper on this exact topic about communication, cultures. In certain cultures, and I came across this on LinkedIn, one of my friends actually posted this question, is in certain cultures, you are told to be quiet. You're told to not beat your own drums. And that's the culture. You might travel and work in a different place where you notice people around you are the opposite. And in fact, what's happening is you get rewarded for beating your drums. In fact, the person who goes silent is kind of forgotten, right? And there's a saying in different languages, only the crying baby gets the milk, right? So you have communication styles, you have communication methods, but you also have a deep foundational philosophy and upbringing that can mask all of that. So how do you advise people to learn? And you said you can learn, and I believe you when you say people can learn any new style. So what's your take on that?
Well, my take on that is that's where the fun is, and it's it really is good fun to be able to adapt and do things differently. So, give you an example, and we're preparing some work together, and I sent you some slides the other day, and you give me all this feedback that is basically I've read between the lines. And Suraj was saying to me, you stupid European, actually say what you're good at,
In a very diplomatic way.
Really modest thing. I mean, in the UK culture, right? You do not boast. I mean, you do not put yourself forward in the strong way that you do in the US, right? And it takes me a while, working with you guys to put myself across as strongly as Americans do. But it's just a way of being. And once you get used to it, it's good fun. And so, and this kind of applies to, I think, anything outside of your bubble. As you say, you've got a cultural bubble, you've got all this baggage and so on and so forth. If you become aware of it and then think, in these circumstances, I'm allowed to do something different, it can be fun as well. So, take a positive attitude to it. You're not been given a whole load of limitations that are, completely insurmountable. They're just tendencies that you need to be aware of and counteract.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And that understanding actually occurred to me not too long ago. And the one thing that actually helped me with that precise understanding was going back to a win-win situation. And it's about being assertive, not aggressive, not passive, where if you're being aggressive, you only care about your feelings. And if you're passive, you only care about the other person's and you forget about your own feelings. It's about being assertive, where you can engage while respecting the other culture, but not giving up your own.
Yeah.
So by bringing respect to both parties, yourself and the other, it's actually not two camps anymore, it's the same. And I think that's where I felt that bringing my culture and my upbringing and my evolution to the table while understanding, listening, and respecting the other person truly helped bridge that gap. And I think that's what I was trying to say in terms of, to this person, bring that support system, bring people together. It's not going to be easy, but it's what's going to help you win in the long term. Yeah.
Yeah, I think also when you bring people together as well, you end up, I mean, there are relatively superficial differences between people, but the fundamental stuff is always the same.
Right.
You know, deep down, you start then to separate the veneer from the things that really matter, and then you find that everybody is, you know, there are things that matter that don't change so much from culture to culture.
Yeah. So I think, Andy, it's a good time to, we took a lot of questions on chat. Maybe a few questions if anyone wants to ask live, and actually unmute their mic and actually ask Andy or me or the moderators any questions. So audience, anyone would like to ask a question or two?
Okay, I can go. How do we put our ideas into action, any kind of in a disciplined way, right? Any thoughts about that? A lot of people have a lot of things that they want to do, but things get lost in their head and or along with other things. So any tips for that?
There's always the Gordon Gekko advice, which is buy my book. Okay, I've got a book out there. It depends a little bit, Srinivasan, on whether it's a one-to-one or one-to-group conversation. It's quite a difficult question to answer, but I'll take a stab at it. One of the tools that I find the most useful in work situations is just called MAP, which is my objectives, audience, and plan. So if you've got a communication task of some sort, a meeting to worry about, going to see a customer or whatever, a really good place to start is to get some clarity on my objectives, and that means not just what you want to get, what you want to tell people, but also things you want to find out and things you want to discuss and agree. So get those things really clear, because that sets your sights. Audience, so like we were just discussing, you need to visualize in some way who you're going to meet. And that means not just a list of names and roles, but also, how do they perceive the world? What's their viewpoint? What concerns might they have about whatever you're getting into with them? What are their expectations of their meeting with you? And then once you've got those two things straight, you can start to think about what you're going to do, your plan, right? Now, the plan is kind of the feeblest bit, because very often, on first contact with the enemy, the plan is the first victim, it goes straight in the bin. But the process of planning is very useful. So even if you never use your plan, the process of thinking through a few scenarios and what might happen is very, very handy. So you can start with a map, my objectives, audience, plan, and that I've found to be the most useful general tool that I use just all the time. 2 minutes before I have to call a customer, I'll scribble down objective, audience, and plan on a piece of paper, just so that I do this context switch from what I was doing previously to my next thing as quickly as possible. So am I anywhere close to answering your question?
Yeah, that helps. That definitely helps.
Okay.
Andy, I think one of the key things that I take from what you said is visualizing. So whether you're working with a customer, whether you're doing this for yourself, whether you're doing this for your manager or peer, it's that visualization of what that to-be state is. kind of breaks down the cloud of ambiguity. And then with that, the fear also dilutes. But it's that visualization is so powerful. We don't realize that even before we started this, we visualized, and Pooja went through the whole power poses and reaffirmations. It's that visualization that really helps us saying we are awesome. We can get that promotion. We can start that new company. We can, go run a 5-mile run, even if you've never done it before. It's about taking those baby steps. And I think what you said is map, and exactly what a map is. You visualize the route from point A to point B, whether it's straight or through the hills and tunnels. But that visualization demystifies. Did that capture what you were trying to say in a different way?
Yeah, it demystifies, it clarifies, it gets you in the right state of mind to succeed. And if I could contrast it with something else, I mean, the thing about starting off that way is you know where you're going, and you've got some idea of what you're going to come up against. Now, that can be completely wrong, but at least you've started your mind thinking in the right direction. And you've built some autonomy into this. So if you know where you're going, no matter what comes up in terms of a client encounter, no matter what somebody comes up with, you're going to find a way around it if you know where you're trying to get to. And if you only have a kind of we're going to do this, this, and this, and you're not too clear on where you want to get, you've just got step by step. As soon as you get kicked off track, you're really lost. So yeah,
that's true.
We've got another one.
Thanks a lot.
And I think you're taking a page out of your book, Andy, which I've been reading recently, is one of the things that you want this audience to perhaps have is not just answers, but perhaps more questions that have been triggered by the answers that they got. So they know more questions is always a good thing. So they know what's next. It's the breadcrumbs thrown out into the future. And I think that could be our callback, our action to why these people would want to not just attend a call like this, but also go seek answers, whether it be on YouTube, reading books, talking to their managers, talking to their friends. It's the call to action to go beyond than just this call. It doesn't end with once this call ends. Do you have anything else in terms of what you'd like people on this call to do once this call ends? What would you like them to follow up on?
Well, I hope the call has just made people curious about what could be done. You could go out there and look for tools, for example. One of the things that can help a lot is just raising a consciousness of what you're doing. And to do that, it very often helps to have the tools like the HBDI chart that Pooja brought in. I mean, those things, the actual data you get is not always very accurate because it's statistical stuff, but it gives you another frame of reference. And if map is another thing, it gives you a structure that you can hook some thoughts onto. So a sensible follow-up to a call like this, if more communication is of interest to you, is to look out there for one or two tools that are around and see how they suit you, tame them, put them into your own toolkit, play around. That's how it works. I put quite a lot of emphasis on tools because, after all, we're engineers. We use tools all the time. So why not use them? Also in the communication sphere. Look for decent things that suit you, things that are simple. Yeah.
Wonderful. I just want to make a quick time check. If there are any other questions on chat, Pooja, please surface it if you don't mind.
No, not on the chat, but I believe someone in the audience wanted to ask a question.
Okay. Anyone in the audience? If you're asking, you're on mute.
I think everybody's going to go buy Andy's book now. I thought that was a call to action.
My other call to action would be we'll have more of these sessions, most likely on a monthly basis. So I'm excited to have everyone join us, present more questions. So if there are no questions, I'll take a brief pause. If there are no more questions, I would like to have a little bit of messages to communicate at the end. So moderators, we're good to go?
Yes.
Thank you. All
Yeah,
right.
we should be good.
Okay. Andy, any closing comments from you before I close the
Well, no,
session?
just thank you very much for your participation. Thanks for the questions that came across. I hope some of the comments have been useful to you. And yeah, great. And thanks for organizing it.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
Really
yeah, no, it was our pleasure to have you. And, thanks everyone for joining Grow Your Mind. Again, brought to you by GROUNOW. Please join me in thanking our guest, Andy. So big round of applause for joining us. Shout out to our moderators, Pooja and Josh. Thank you. Without your help, I don't think we would have had this session as successful as it is. And thank you all for attending, and looking forward to hosting you next time. But expect a follow-up survey link that will come up on the browser after this call ends. So I'd like you guys to do us a favor by rating the topic, rating how we executed this, what was bad, what was good. Just let us know. If we want to make this better, not just for you, but the other people that you'll be helping us help. And that's very important. And if there are future topics, speakers that you'd like us to bring on board, please let us know. And this is my favorite part. 3 random participants will get a chance to get a $10 gift card. So stay tuned for that. We will send it your way. Check out GROUNOW for the recording. It will be posted later. And for other related announcements, stay tuned. Wishing you all learning, joy, and success. Thank you, Andy, once again for joining us. And thank you all for attending.
Thank you all. Right. Cheers, then.
Thank you.